Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, V'al Kol Yisrael, V'meru, Amen. This week's Torah portion, we read a rather fascinating story. You know, a lot of people, they're familiar with the stories in Genesis and in Exodus. Not too many movies were made about the stories in the Book of Numbers, and they assume, oh, Book of Numbers, what's that all about? Is there anything interesting in there? It starts off with a census, but it goes on to tell what went on during the 40 years that they wandered in the desert, and a lot of interesting things happened. It also teaches us various laws, but also, as we find it, the same thing in Exodus. Book of Exodus has many laws as well. Leviticus is mostly laws and only has one narrative, one or two narratives. But stories, yeah. Oh. But when I say story, I don't want you to think that it's a made-up story. I mean, this is history. This really happened. So that's why maybe we could use the word narrative is a better word. But story is just as good because you tell a story even of things that happen too, and it's not. We say Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, the story of the Exodus. We know it's true. So too, when they wandered in the desert for 40 years, we read last week how they wound up wandering. People think, oh, Moses just didn't want to ask for directions, but that's not what happened.
He was proud. Yeah, he wanted to lead his people. He wanted to be the leader. He didn't want nobody telling him.
The fact that's not true. That's not true because we know that they were guided by God with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. So they weren't just wandering around aimlessly. They were guided by God, where they're going, how they're getting there. And they actually made it to the Holy Land the second year they were there. They were at the border, and they asked to send in spies. And when the spies came back with a negative report, 10 of the 12 spies they sent in came back with a negative report, which the people accepted. So then it was decreed that they should wander for 40 years. They weren't really wandering most of the time. One of the stations that they were at, they stayed for 19 years actually. So there wasn't much wandering. But they traveled to 42 different stations throughout their journey in the desert. And then they came back to the Holy Land. Of course, Moses passed away and Joshua led them in. It should be noted that there were people that we read last week, there were people who wanted, after the decree of the 40 years, they said, we're sorry, we're going to go in to the land God promised. And Moses says, it's too late. God already said no. And those people got wiped out. And that teaches a lesson that it's not about the land, it's about the will of God. Some people, they worship the land, they fetishize the land of Israel or wherever they are. And it's not the will of God like that. The message and the other message is that wherever we go, the prophet tells us, Ki mitzion teitzei soro dvar Hashem Yushalayim, that from Zion will go out the Torah and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And we're familiar with this. This is in our liturgy. And a lot of people are excited that, look at what, how beautiful, this, they become obsessed with the land, with saying, look, this is the land of the Torah. The city of Torah is Jerusalem. But if you actually look at the context there, where it says that Ki mitzion teitzei sora, Udvar Hashem Yushalayim, which it comes from, it's mentioned a few places. It's mentioned in Isaiah, but it's also in it's one of the later prophets, one of the 12 prophets. It's mentioned again. If you look at the context there, it's talking about the Torah leaving Jerusalem and spreading to the whole world. That the Ki mitzion teitzei sora, that from Zion will go out the Torah and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, meaning that the word of God is not supposed to be encompassed just in one little piece of land the size of New Jersey, but it's supposed to spread to the whole world, and the whole world is supposed to be made more beautiful. why God put us in exile for that reason, so that we can spread the light of God, the truth of God, to the whole world, not just keep it in a little bubble. But that's beside the point. There's a time and a place for everything also, and a lot of people question, when's the time, when's the place? We all agree that eventually, perhaps by virtue of the fact that we're so spread out, and that the end times will be so miraculous and so filled with peace and joy and love, that when the restoration happens, that will be a restoration that will bring the whole world to appreciate. And if it would have just been in a small area, like the first exile to Babylonia, we went to Babylonia as a unit and came back to Jerusalem. Not a fraction of the people, not even everybody came back. And many stayed in Babylonia. But now, when the Romans destroyed the temple, now we spread out to the whole world. And so when restoration happens, it will be a restoration that will impress the whole world. But there's a time and a place for everything, and that's really the message I want to bring out in this teaching. We read a very fast, again, another story from the book of Numbers, which, this we just described is from last week. But this week we read a fascinating story of Korach, in the book of Numbers, chapter 16, the rebellion of Korach. Korach was a Levite, a cousin of Moses, and he stood up and he said, Moses, why do you lift yourself up over the congregation? Everybody's holy. We all should be equal. We should have a classless society. Everybody's holy. Everybody should be equal. Why do you decide that you should be the leader and not make everybody equal? The problem with that was Korach, really, he didn't want everybody to be equal. Like we have, people are familiar with Orwell, and he had the animal farm, and they said, all the animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And so too, Korach, he claimed, he waved this banner of everybody's holy, but we know really he wanted to be the leader. He wanted to take it away from Moses, not to make everybody equal, but to take the leadership from himself. Now, the ideas that he had and that he taught and he espoused were very beautiful, but the point is that our greed, the basic normal humanity, we're not ready for that yet. And so it's better to live in a different type of society where there are different types of people. If everybody was a king, there would be no kings. If everybody was a general, there would be no general. When there is a time and a place for things. Yes, eventually things are going to be different. Eventually there will be this revelation of godliness that will bring this total equality. But until then, we do have equality. We were all created equal. But we were given by our Creator certain inalienable rights, like the founders of this country said, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These things are certainly inalienable rights, something that no one can take away. Even if they pretend to take it away, they're really not taking it away. But there's a difference between happiness and this pursuit of happiness. And we should pursue happiness for ourselves, but also not at the expense of others. But hold on. But we've seen in history other people making these claims like Korach, and the world's just not ready for it. There was and what happened eventually is that Korach and his whole family got swallowed up by the earth. If you're familiar with the story, it's quite a dramatic story. Now, the point that was an interesting thing, we have rather interesting legends, midrashim, surrounding the story of Korach, giving us kind of a backstory. That one points out, the rabbis point out that right before the story of Korach, in the end of last week's parsha, we have the mitzvah of tzitzis, fringes that we put on the four-cornered garment. Yeah. So, in ancient times, the tzitzis would be colored blue, and the tradition, just the middle string.
This color blue?
Well, maybe, but just the middle string. So, meaning you would have white and blue. So, like, this part would be blue, and then this part would be mostly white with one string of blue. Then, so, hold on. So, and that blue was actually, it came from some kind of a sea creature. There's different opinions what it is, whether a cuttlefish is related to octopus. It's a very interesting fish. They can change shapes and colors and textures. And they're said to be very intelligent also for mollusks, or some other type of mollusk or sea creature that has blue blood. And that was what this the dye was made of. And eventually the tradition of which type of animal it was lost. There's different theories, and certain people claim and so forth. But in ancient times, that's how they had it. So the Midrash says that Korach came to Moses with the following argument. He says, Moses, tell me something. If I have a talus that's entirely dyed blue, the whole thing is dyed blue, do I still need to put one blue string on each corner? And Moses said, yeah. You still have to put the blue string. So he said, let me ask you something else. A mezuzah on the door is 2 paragraphs from the Torah. The Shema and the V'hayim Shemoah, which we say together with the Shema, the first 2 paragraphs of the Shema are written in the mezuzah, and we put that on the door. Now, what if you had a whole house that's full of Torah scrolls, a whole room full of Torah scrolls, Bayis Molei Sfarim? Would you still need? You have it already. Would you still need to put it on the door? Moses said, yes. Still need to put it on the door. So Korach, it says, he made fun of them, and they said, look at this. Moses, he's just trying to run things, he's just trying to steal from the people. That's what people often say. The religious leaders, they just want to rip everyone off, they just care about money, they're not really caring about us. Moses, I never took anything from anybody. I didn't take one donkey from them, nothing. What are you trying to tell me? I didn't do anything. But let's have God settle this. And said, you want to be a priest instead of my brother Aaron? Because Korach said, look, Moses made himself the king, and he made his brother the priest. He said, I didn't do it. God did it. God chose us. And you're Levites. Levites also have a big portion. You're ministers of the Lord. You should be happy being Levites. And Korach was like, well, everybody should be equal. And then, so Moses said, let's see. Let all you people who want to be priests now, go bring me an incense holder and burn incense, and Aaron's going to do the same, and let's see who the incense offering God is going to accept. And then what happened shortly after that was all those people were swallowed up by the earth, and all their possessions and everything. Now, one of the later Hasidic masters was Rabbi Tzadok of Lublin. Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, the priest of Lublin, he's a rather interesting figure. Now, if you know anything about modern-day Jewish history, the Hasidic movement started in Ukraine in the 1700s, about 300 years ago, almost. A little bit less than 300 years ago, began this movement, a popular movement, a revival, mystical revival movement, filled with joy. Hold on, and
I just want to say,
yeah, hold on. When we're done, okay. And it was controversial when it happened, this movement, because before this movement there were other movements that were very destructive and very anti-God, going away from Torah. And so a lot of people were like, you know what, these people, they misunderstood Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, so let's put less emphasis on the Kabbalah so these type of very sick movements don't happen again. So there was worry that the Hasidic movement would develop into that as well. And so there was opposition initially. Eventually, other movements came along. I would theorize a lot of them were based on those earlier false, pseudo-messianic movements, the Frankists and Sabbateans, to take people away from Torah. And the Hasidic movement, brought people closer to Torah. It made people more pious. So there developed 2 different camps. There was the opponents to the Hasidic movement and then the Hasidic movement, but eventually those who were not part of the Hasidic movement realized that the Hasidic movement, it's maybe not for them, it's not for everybody, but it's kosher. It's not as bad as they thought it would be. And many from the Hasidic movement say probably the fact that hold on.
No, someone wants to say about kosher.
Yeah, but we're not talking about that. The fact that there was opposition kept them healthy, kept them from going off the deep end. I remember on a totally different note, but a similar way, I was listening to a radio show. It was a priest and a Catholic deacon, and the deacon said that the best, and I hope I'm not offending anybody with this, but he said, there's a Catholic deacon, he said the best thing for the Catholic Church was the Protestant Reformation, because it brought the Catholic Church in line also. The same thing, in a way, the best thing for the Hasidic movement was the opposition to the Hasidic movement, because it kept them from going off the deep end. The same thing in politics. The fact that we have a two-party system, essentially, even though there are minor third parties, but two major parties that have very different ideas, if they come together and they can debate, they keep each other in check. It's a system of checks and balances, not only within the constitutional system that we have checks and balances of the various branches of the government, but also, which is extra-constitutional, the party system is not based on the Constitution, but the development of the party system is to it keeps people in check. It keeps a balance. Hopefully, not always. Sometimes people go off the deep end, and that's a problem too, even with the two parties, and it develops into hatred, which was never supposed to be. It's just, but we're supposed to be able to get along, and that's this story with Korach. I wanted to say a teaching from Rabbi Tzadok the Kohen from Lublin, who lived about 100 years ago, and Rabbi Tzadok, a little more than 100 years ago, he said that just his story, he did not grow up in the Hasidic movement, but he became a Hasidic Rebbe. How did that happen? He was a great genius even from his childhood. He was 8 years old and he wrote books on some of the most complicated parts of Jewish law. And when he was a young child, he was a brilliant, brilliant genius, an Eloi, a child prodigy from his youth, and it didn't go to his head. He remained a prodigy throughout his life as a genius. At a certain point in his life, he, I don't know the exact reasoning, but he wanted to divorce his wife, but was unable to for some reason. She wouldn't accept a divorce or something, I don't know exactly. So the Jewish law, technically in the Torah, ancient times allowed polygamy. But the rabbis, hold on. But the rabbis wanted to limit polygamy because it wasn't part of the society today. And so they declared they couldn't totally outlaw something that was permitted by the Torah. And there was times and the places for certain things. So they decided that only in an extreme case, like for example, where a woman didn't want to accept a divorce, she wasn't functioning anymore as a wife, she was missing, she was in a coma or something, she couldn't accept a divorce, whatever it is, that the rabbis would give permission to a man to take a second wife. When essentially he really wasn't, he was already separated from his first wife. And there were different traditions. So the Sephardic tradition is that you need permission from 3 rabbis to allow this, but the Ashkenazic tradition became that you need permission from 100 rabbis. And so on these rare occasions, and it still happens today sometimes, I know a case, I was a chaplain in a federal prison, and there was an inmate there who was totally innocent. His ex-wife was very abusive, a horrible woman, and she wanted custody of her kids. She framed the husband for the things that she was guilty of herself. And the kids all said, "What are you talking about?" They said to the judge, "What are you talking about? Our father's a saint. Our mother's the one who did it." And the judge says, "Your mother's not on trial. Your father's on trial. You can't testify." He wound up losing the case, and he got 30 years. She was, but they were already divorced for a while before that. She remarried. She married a big rabbi here locally, and the rabbi realized he made a big mistake. He thought she was really telling the truth, but then he realized he made a big mistake and he wanted to divorce her. And she said, "I'll only accept a divorce if you give me $5 million." The first one didn't have money, but he had money, but he couldn't afford to give her $5 million. So he managed to get permission from 100 rabbis that he, and when she wants to get divorced, it's up to her to accept the divorce. He's ready to give it, but she didn't want to take it. So anyway, we're going back 100 years. I don't know the exact details of the situation, but Rabbi Tzadok, he was traveling all around Europe. Nowadays, he could probably go on the internet and get 100 rabbis. I don't know, but in those days, they didn't have internet. They barely had telephones, for sure. Not in these parts of Eastern Europe, except maybe in the big cities, So the telephone was invented in 1865. So 1875, 1877, 1876. Around that time was when Bell invented the telephone. They had telegraphs, but still, he had to travel around and get.
How old is the Torah?
Hold up. The Torah?
How old is the Torah?
It's 3,300 years. I mean, it's eternal. It comes from God. But I'm saying it was revealed on earth 3,300 years ago, 3,300 years ago, but a little more than that. But so Rabbi Tzadok, he was trying to find 100 rabbis to sign this petition, and eventually, so he visited who he was familiar with, who were not from the Hasidic movement, but then he started to visit also Hasidic rabbis. He visited all over, and he wound up in Lublin by Ishbitzer. He wound up in Ishbitz, not in Lublin, a small town in Poland, Ishbitz. And the Ishbitzer was a great thinker, rather kind of controversial. He believed in a very radical theology of predestination, quite different than many others. But he became enamored with this court. At first he wasn't so impressed, but eventually he became a full-fledged follower, and eventually he himself became a Rebbe. And he wrote He wrote brilliant books, the Reb Tzadok, and so his commentary on the Torah, on the Bible, is called Pri Tzaddik, and he writes there concerning Korach. He discusses this that we mentioned, that Korach said, a talis that's all blue, talis shekulei techeles, or a bayis molei svarim, a house that's full of books, does it need a mezuzah? Does the talis that's all techeles need the one string of techeles? And he said, everybody's holy, everybody's equal. Reb Tzadok says a rather incredible thing. He says, essentially, he didn't say in exactly these words, he used a lot of Kabbalistic terminology that I'm not going to use right now, but he says essentially that almost, in a sense, Korach, who was rebelling against Moses, was saying Moses is the Messiah. He wasn't, not in the personal sense, but that essentially they were living already in the Messianic era, in the time when everything was perfect. And so Moses' argument to him, and so he talks of a talish kuli techelis, meaning everything surrounded, bayis molei svarim, a house full of books, everything is filled, everything is full. And Moses said, that's a beautiful idea, Korach. You're right, everybody's holy. Moses himself said, if only everyone, if only God would give, that everyone would be prophets. Because earlier in the book of Numbers, we have this story where there was Eldad and Medad were prophesying in the camp, and someone came and told Joshua. Joshua came and told Moses, and he said, you got to put them in prison. They're prophesying. It's not their job. You're the prophet, not them. And Moses said, no. Let them be prophets. If only all of God's people were prophets. So Moses was looking forward to that. He also recognized that we weren't there yet. And so he said, Korach, you have a beautiful idea. It's a great idea, but you got to go step by step. If you run into things you're not ready for, it's not going to work. We got to work on ourselves. This Torah is here to teach us lessons, teach us how to live, how not to be selfish, how to be loving, how to be caring, how to be faithful, how to be honest. And it doesn't work right away for everybody. It takes time, it takes work. It might take thousands of years of work. And we're not there yet. And that's why, I listened to one spiritual speaker who's not Jewish. His wife is Jewish, and he does mention certain things from Jewish traditions, from Kabbalah and things. And he says that part of the reason why the world is not perfect yet is because of our selfishness, because of our greed, because of our tendency to fight, our prejudices, our bigotry, and if we could just overcome these things, then from heaven would come down these great revelations that we're just not ready for yet. Meaning, there is possibility of very advanced science in this world. There's possibility for things that would make all of our world today obsolete. And it exists already, and it's out there. But why don't we know about it? And the reason is because we're not ready for it yet. And if we were ready for it, then God would let us have it. But we're not ready yet. And the same thing, Moses saying to Korach, that's a beautiful idea. Yes, essentially everybody is holy in their essence, but we have to go work on things step by step. We have to learn. We can't jump into things because, like we've said, we've seen other societies that have attempted this. We can know that people maybe when he talked about God, maybe he did mean for the sake of heaven. Maybe his intentions were pure. Maybe not. Probably not, because then otherwise, why did God have the earth swallow him up? But his ideas sounded beautiful. But the thing was, is again, he's giving this propaganda that everybody's holy, but he didn't mean it. He just wanted to be Moses. He didn't want to be. He didn't want to be second Moses. So. Hold on.
Will we be over by 3:30?
Yeah, we're over in a minute. That's, hold on. They didn't come down yet. So anyway, thank you.
Okay. Can I say